Welcome to the next session of the uh, network seminar series hosted by the Center for Network Intelligence at the Robert Bosch Center for Cyber Physical Systems at IISc. Today's talk is by Dr. Praveen Govindan Kannan, and he will be speaking on network fault diagnostics in data centers and beyond. Dr. Praveen is a research scientist at IBM Research India. He has completed his PhD from National University of Singapore in 2019. His research has been recognized with the Best Paper Award at ACM SOSR 2019 and Facebook Research Award. Prior to PhD, he has obtained Masters from NUS and BE from College of Engineering Indy in 2018. And he has worked in Cisco for 4 years. His research interests are the areas of surrounding telcos, data center networks, and programmable networks. Over to you, Dr. Praveen.
Thanks, Preetham, for the intro. Hello, everyone. So, Praveen. So, this session, I'll be talking about network diagnostics in data center networks and beyond. I have split my talk into two parts. So, first part, I'll be talking about a recent work on network fault debugging. Using synchronized packet histories. This paper recently got published at NSDI. And towards the later part of the talk, I will be focusing more on recent ongoing works at IBM Research, IRL. Let me start with the one of our work on debugging transient faults in data center networks. And we use a new technique called synchronized network-wide packet histories. So this work was done along with Nishant, Raj, and Prof. Manchun Chan at National University of Singapore. Okay. So cloud reliability is very critical with several businesses and services relying on them. So these cloud services are supported by data center networks, which are at the scale of several thousands of devices with complex interconnects. Failures are extremely sensitive in these cases and can result in hurting the customer's revenues and incur a huge loss for the cloud providers as well. There have been various research on or at least measurements on why these faults occur, and data center operators have mainly noted that most of the outages are caused due to network failures. Among the network failures, a relatively large proportion, that is about 29% of the failures, go without establishing the root cause. And it was further observed that the failures that could not be root caused were either transient in nature, and the debugging information which is collected at different parts of the network could not give a complete picture to correlate the overall events leading up to the fault. So even though you have information, you can't do much with that. So let's look at one of the example of a transient fault, which is quite common in an operational data center. So which is microburst. So microburst is are periods of high network utilization, but it lasts for less than a microsecond or less than a millisecond. So it has been found that such issues, in fact, encompass most congestion events in the network. So this finding was mainly from Facebook data center, but it's quite common across many different data centers. So the reason for microburst, so let me give you an example of why a microburst would occur. So in this case, let's take a topology where the host H1 and H6 are sending packets at around the same time to a single host. So in this case, a bunch of packet or a burst of packet which arrives at the same time at switch S7 could cause a high network queuing effect on it, and typically leads to a microburst. And the next millisecond, you may not see this happening at all. So this is one of the reasons for a microburst. However, there are several different reasons. That is, one is network queuing due to load balance and heavy hitters present in the traffic, and also network misconfiguration. So it's quite important to know why this reason of a microburst is more important than a microburst itself. So let's take another example which involves a different.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go back to the previous slide.
Yeah.
So I understand the example which you first gave, that a lot of packets aggregated at one of the switches and then leads to microbus.
Yeah.
But I didn't understand that how do heavy hitters lead to this? Because the heavy hitters would probably exist for a long time, right? I mean, I'm sort of thinking elephant flow. So you would see this, you not see microbus, you will see actually long lasting bursts. So you'll be able to identify this, no?
Yeah, so heavy hitter, so in one of our experiments, we found that heavy hitter, I mean, even though you have a consistent heavy hitter, there could be a short burst of traffic coming from like the neighboring racks, which could actually affect, which could eventually lead up to a microburst.
So you're saying that heavy hitters are sort of at the edge of where the burst could take place, and small perturbation can lead it to the.
Okay. Yes, yeah. So in those cases, you could, it may not be synchronized application traffic, but it's a combination of multiple different types of traffic which lead up to the microburst. So
when you say synchronized application traffic, are you thinking more like that I have sort of aggregation happening at certain switches because of the application, and that's what is leading to this burst, or what is in your mind?
So synchronized, so this is basically a map reduce kind of workload where
okay, fine. Then I understand.
Yeah. So it's the application that is causing the problem, not the network in this case.
So in those scenarios, I don't see, or maybe you will talk about this a little bit later. So it is clear in those scenarios that the only thing you can do is probably try to move around the location of the microburst, right? By changing the route. But there is not much else you can do, right? Because it's something that you have to live with.
Yes, yeah. So, this probably, I mean, we don't understand whether it's a network capacity problem or it's an application problem, right? So, that identifying that itself is a big thing now.
I see. So, two more things which I didn't understand is this network queuing. How does it lead to this microburst, and the network misconfiguration? These two is not clear to me at all.
So I will look at the load imbalance first. That network queuing, I meant load imbalance. So which the example that I give next next slide. Network misconfiguration is more like there is an old paper called Z Update from Microsoft. So when you move around workloads, you try to configure a different load on different links, and when you configure them for a brief amount, the network update didn't happen, like for few milliseconds. So at that time, a particular link could be overloaded.
So are you thinking like SDN based routing here, that you are configuring the routes to go, and then you made a mistake in this configuration?
Not a mistake. It's just the nature that
the delays associated with it.
Yeah. Okay. So delays due to the application of the routing updates, right? So it could actually cause this. Then old paper Z Update in 2010. You can look up that. That will give you more insights on why this could happen.
Thanks for humoring me. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll come to the next example where we take a load imbalance. Let's take a network that balances load equally across multiple paths to the destination. But however, due to a load imbalancing issue, let's say a bug, a bursty flow could actually occupy the single path, and it fills up the switch queue, right? So when a packet drop happens in this switch queue, the operator needs to know why or the root cause of this particular packet drop. So let's see an example on like the reason for this packet drop could be actually actually two ways. That is, one is a genuine congestion event that is happening in the network, where the network experiences more than the provision capacity traffic, and hence both the switch queues are full. So in this case, you can't do much. So because the network is seeing more traffic and the load balancing algorithm is working just fine. But the second case that we are seeing is that the there is a load imbalance, that is more traffic is going towards a particular switch, and while the rest of the network is not heavily loaded. So in this case, it's a poor load balancing algorithm that is at fault. So the point is asynchronous measurements on a single device or a single path cannot actually differentiate between these two cases. So to correlate the two switch queues and identify the root cause in these scenarios, fine-grained, synchronized, and network-wide historical information is required to find these root causes in these cases. So let's look at the reality. I mean, at least now, the existing data centers mostly host proprietary network hardware and software.
Sorry, Praveen, one more question before you go there. So if you go back, I don't see that. See, when you're doing, that you're using network information to do routing, right? So if this happens in transient, right, by the time you get this information, that moment has passed, right? Because the time to collect information and to take action is much larger than the time of microburst. So
exactly,
I don't see how you will counter this.
So you mean how to solve this, or
how to solve this? Like this could be instantaneous, right? There is no way.
Yeah, that's actually the problem, because the sporadic nature of this is like it's there and it's gone. So actually the traditional measurements, right, that we have usually, like net flow, S flow, may not even capture these things. So microbursts are only observed by like fine grain monitoring itself. But eventually it is affecting your application behavior in terms of
no, I understand, but in some sense that you will have to react to it very quickly, which I don't see. Okay, maybe we'll talk about this. I don't see how in the current setup we're not even be able to observe it so quickly, right?
True. Yeah, I mean, I get your point. Yeah, reacting to it is another whole new game. So detecting it itself is a difficult thing right now. So reacting to it at its own scale is definitely a much more challenging problem to solve.
Maybe if you do a root cause analysis and eliminate the cause completely, even though you are not able to react to it then and there.
Exactly, yeah.
Solve the bug. So I think there is still value in analyzing. Maybe you are not able to react right away, but
yes. So many times we it's not possible to react to it, but definitely it helps in offline analysis, and at least knowing what has caused the problem earlier. And in many cases, transient issues, it may even lead to a single packet drop, and it would lead to an application degradation. So it still makes sense to analyze what has happened in the network leading up to the behavior. I hope I answered the question, right?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. So the existing techniques that we have right now are mostly CLI based debugging using syslogs and sample based monitoring techniques like NetFlow, SFlow, or polling from the control plane of the switch. So debugging using these disaggregated solutions incur information loss due to sampling. And most importantly, they are very tedious, and they cannot correlate different events happening in different parts of the network, right? So let's understand more on the architecture of the proprietary devices. So the switches generally have a data plane which does the fast path forwarding. The data plane is usually a fixed function ASIC that contains a fixed hard-coded parser and fixed match action tables, which support standard IETF protocols, and they cannot be customized much by the operators. And additionally, on top, it contains a control plane CPU, which programs the rules in the data plane and runs the protocols in the slow path. So you are restricted with what we can monitor or do in the data plane. So recently we have seen over the past decade, we have seen the emergence of programmable networks. And I mean, less than 5 years ago, we have seen emergence of programmable switching ASICs, with reconfigurable data planes. So basically your programmable switch can have any can be programmed to parse any type of flexible header, and basically you can program whatever data plane program that you want to be run in the data plane. For example, ACL, QoS, tunneling, or telemetry, and so on. And if the operator needs to change one of the program, or at least the programmer wants to change the program, basically they can add their own functionality, and it's there immediately for the network to run. So what they contain basically is like, apart from the programmability, they also have stateful computation, which for example, you could store the bytes in a sketch and use them for heavy hitter detection or something. And additionally, they also have precise timestamps available in the network data plane at different stages in the network. So you could know the timestamp of a packet at the parser level, at the ingress level, or amount of time it queued in the network. So you can actually design good telemetry techniques to debug the flow of a packet. So even though the programmable switches offer flexibility, they can still process up to a billion packets per second with a modest extra chip area and a higher power profile. So currently these switches, basically at least until we use them, it was they could scale up to 12 terabits per second using multiple pipelines. So, however, nothing comes for free, right? Yeah. So to maintain the line rate without compromising on the flexibility, it has a few restrictions on programmability. Like, so we cannot have loop constructs. So a program has to be fit into the memory profile, and also there cannot be any complex computations like floating point or multiplication that can be done in the network. And most importantly, the SRAM memory is a single ported. So which means that in a single packet pass, you can only read or write from a particular memory in a single packet pass. So this really restricts on the program, put a restrictions on the amount of programmability that you can do. So we have to live with that. So overall, programmable networks still like they enable network evolution, innovation faster and easier compared to fixed function ASICs, which take about 4 to 5 years. And recently, many switch vendors have started shipping out networks or switches with programmable data plane architecture. And so this offers network researchers a unique opportunity to develop ASIC-based
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So go back. What did you mean by this parallel data plane pipeline? Are you saying that there'll be multiple servers or CPUs sort of computing paths for many paths available, or so what does it exactly mean? So
the data plane itself is like pipelined into different, it's like partitioned kind of thing. So the processing is partitioned. So you have a hard-coded partition like 0 to 10 port is served by pipeline 0. 10 to 20 is served by pipeline 1, and each pipeline is capable of 1 billion packets per second.
So I understand. So the difficulty with this partitioning is the following. So I understood. I mean, at least I think I understood.
Yeah.
That sometimes you do need information from other partitions to make decisions in this.
Exactly.
Right? And then what do you do in this case?
So in that case, that's basically, I mean, there are many papers on how to synchronize the states between pipelines.
So that must happen at a little bit lower rate, right?
Yeah. So actually each pipeline have a, so there is a dedicated port connecting each pipeline. So you can actually use that to synchronize information. You may not need to synchronize everything. For example, routing tables and all don't need to be synchronized, but you can share states, for example, monitoring states or packet counters. You can still synchronize between them.
Okay, thanks, Praveen.
Yeah. So yeah, so basically what programmable switches can do is make your hardware upgrade into a software upgrade, and when the data centers have it deployed, you can have the switches deployed. You can just do a software upgrade to change the data plane itself that is running in the network. So so what question that we are trying to answer is that can we build a network monitoring and debugging framework to root cause such transient issues using programmable networks? So to answer this question, basically we need to see what capabilities do we need from the network, right? So the first one is visibility, that is network-wide and fine-grained visibility into each part of the network. And second is retrospection, especially because this is a transient issue. We need to know the sequence of events happening before a fault has occurred to actually debug a fault. And third is the ability to correlate different events happening in different parts of the network. So these are the three capabilities that we would ideally need from a network. So let's look at the first visibility and retrospection and how existing works cover them. So to address the visibility and retrospection, there have been approaches such as per packet postcards, or it's also integrated into INT, in-band network telemetry XD, where for each data packet, a control packet is created by the switches and which contain the packet header information, and they are sent to a central controller where you can have the history information, everything that you want, and when a fault occurs, you have the information to debug a fault. So, but what is the problem is due to limited, due to the bottleneck, due to the limited network bandwidth available for exporting these postcards and the storage overheads, which they cannot be scaled to several terabits per second. So it's not feasible to implement this technique in an operational data center. So a diametrically opposite approach would be to append this telemetry information in the packet header itself, like as shown by, as done by in-band network telemetry. So this approach basically uses the end host to store the appropriate per packet telemetry information after extracting the headers. So, but the main problem with this technique is due to you are increasing the packet size by embedding additional telemetry information on it. And it has been found that it actually reduces the goodput by up to 20%. So it may not be, you may not want to rely on it always.
Sorry, Praveen, one more question.
Yeah. Okay.
So what was the difference between this INT and the previous postcard one? I didn't understand. I understand this INT, that you put the telemetry information in the header, and then you at the end host, you're gonna strip it and store it, right?
So in the previous one, that is NetSite or INTXT, you for every packet you create create another packet and send it to a controller. So you so for yeah. So do you get it? So yes, you're basically creating extra packets, and it's kind of like an out of band monitoring. But the next one is in band. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So doing this, doing INT continuously in an operational network may be wasteful, or maybe considered wasteful, because network faults actually occur.
Sorry, there is another question in the chat. By Molly, maybe you wanna unmute yourself and ask.
Okay, I can see the chat. What Everflow is doing? Everflow. Okay. Actually, I kind of forgot what Everflow does, but I think it is more.
It was a comment. So it does only port mirroring, the technique that what you mentioned. So it's the same thing that you mentioned in the previous slide. So
okay. Yeah, similar to
Everflow from Microsoft, Albert Greenberg and folks had done exactly that. The port mirroring to copy the packet and send it to the controller, and clearly, in a large data center, there are limits to that.
Yeah, so I remember seeing the paper, but I didn't remember what. I think it was like 2015 or 16, probably.
Yeah, very famous. Well cited.
Yes, yeah. Okay, so so in this case, let's say, you can actually another approach would be to possibly collect telemetry information after a problem has been detected, right? But in this case, you may actually miss out on the important aspect, that is retrospection, where you don't know the history of historical information that is actually needed to find the root cause of the transient fault. And especially if you're not able to reproduce the transient fault, it's not possible to solve the issue at all. So INT is more likely meant to be always on INT kind of thing in a network.
So you're saying that if you do infrequent INT, you'll miss out, right? That's what you.
Yeah. Because especially in transient issues, most of the issues that that were covered in the at least the measurements, they were not able to reproduce them very frequently. So you need a solution that is always on, and but it doesn't have the overheads of the mentioned techniques. So let me give a summary of how we solve the visibility and retrospection aspect. leveraging the programmable switches, we actually record the packets as a compressed packet records with the telemetry information inside the switch memory itself. So we have seen that NetSite actually sends them out every time you receive a packet, but instead of sending them out, we actually maintain a ring buffer kind of thing to actually maintain the packet records. And since we cannot afford to flush this recorded data all the time due to the overheads involved, as previously mentioned, we design a fault detection technique in the network data plane itself to selectively export the recorded history to the controller for further debugging. So you export only when you actually need to export, not always. So that's the high level idea. And this way you get both the visibility and retrospection for a particular fault. But however, correlation, let's now look at the correlation aspect.
I have a query. Okay. So how do you act? So for a switch, for a programmable switch to identify there is a fault, you should program it for some anomaly, right?
Yeah.
So,
I'll come to that. Okay. So actually we will that's a kind of a framework that we want to open it to the programmers. Yeah. So I'll explain on how to program the fault, and I mean in the future slides. I'll come to that.
Yeah, please carry on. Please carry on.
Okay. So next we'll look at the correlation aspect. So to correlate networks that are network events that are happening at the nanosecond scale, right? So we need the right ordering of packets or events happening in a network. So to perform distributed ordering of events in the network data plane, actually we need the only way, it's easier way is having a precise time synchronization protocol running in the network data plane itself. So previously we had developed a time synchronization protocol called DPTP. Let me say the key ideas without going into the details. So in DPTP, the network switches maintain the clock, and the synchronization happens between two individual network devices on a single hop basis. So from the core switch to the TOR switch, and finally when the host NIC needs the current time, the switch response, the TOR switch can respond in sub-RTT times. So so that's the protocol that we had implemented earlier. And the main differentiator of this protocol is that the global clock is maintained in the network data plane and is available for each data packet at line rate. So every packet that is coming to the network you can attach a timestamp to it, and you can actually serialize the entire network. So during this synchronization process, we actually account for all the component level delays, that is the queuing delay, the pipeline delay, the parser delay, and we estimate only the serialization and wire delay. So so that's how we are able to cut out most of the noise from the synchronization protocol. So let me state the main results of DPTP. So we observed that the synchronization between neighboring switches is up within 10 nanoseconds, and from the end-to-end switch TORs, it's about 47 nanoseconds, that is 99 percentile. And similarly for host, we observed it to be less than 10 nanoseconds, and for hosts that are separated across racks, we observed it to be close to 50 nanoseconds. So, and the overall cost of the synchronization is also very cheap. That is, it's about 0.6 Mbps per link, and it's about 30 times lesser than host-based synchronization protocols like Huygens. So, we will be using this as the base for our network debugging. So, but the main question to ask is, is this enough? Can DPTP be enough to correlate events that are happening between switches? Because I mean, there's still errors in clock synchronization. Things could go wrong, and the question is whether the events are recorded consistently. So to answer that, let's consider an example like two directly connected switches X and Y with clock CX and CY. To ensure causal consistency in the recorded packet events, we should actually see a packet A leave switch X before reaching switch Y. in our recording. So, but let's assume there is an error in the synchronization, and the T error being the error. And an inconsistency is when packet A is observed in our recording, but packet A that is observed in switch Y, but it's not observed in switch X, that is leaving switch X. So we observe that for this to happen, actually the T error should be greater than the propagation delay between the of the wire or between the two switches. And based on our measurements, we found that this propagation delay between the two adjacent switches is up to like 300 to 1000 or 2 microseconds under different traffic conditions, while while the DPTP observes that the clock synchronization error could be less than 50 nanoseconds. So this shows that it's actually possible to achieve packet level consistency between events recorded in the adjacent switches using the data plane synchronization techniques. So yeah. So with that, with these three complementing techniques, that is visibility, retrospection, and correlation, we will develop synchronized network debugger, that is SynDB. So now let me go into the details of the solution. So in SynDB, the switch data plane clocks are synchronized using DPTP, and each switch maintains a recording ring buffer, which compresses and stores the packet records, which we call as P records. And so it does this when a packet arrives to the switch. So a packet record or a P record typically contains the hash of a packet header, the time it arrived in the switch, the amount of time it queued, and it can also contain custom statistics that can be configured by the operator. Let's say an ingress port, the ingress port from which a packet came from. So the key idea is to leverage the switch data plane as a fast temporal storage to do continuous recording of packets as a moving time window. So when there is no network fault detected, the recording window just moves ahead, and the older packet records beyond the record time length are discarded. So at any point of time, this ring buffer always maintains the recent history of events or packets that came to the switch. So next, the history of the P records is needed when a network fault occurs, right? So for this, SynDB allows network operators to program custom fault trigger conditions. So for example, an operator could configure a trigger. For example, we consider triggers, fault triggers. So an operator could configure trigger to be of a high queuing delay for packets which mean a congestion. So it could be just a simple threshold-based queuing delay, or even a more complicated way. So we allow the APIs to, we basically provide the APIs to program these fault triggers, and we do the translation to the P4 language and program it in the switch. So let's consider this example, like where a queuing delay is greater than a threshold. So let's consider the previous example that we had, that is synchronized fan-in traffic, where host H1 to H6 send traffic at the same time to switch or the switch host at H8 coming through switch S7. So when they send the synchronized fan-in traffic, we observe the trigger to be hit at switch S7. So upon the trigger condition hit at S7, the switch basically notifies all the neighboring switches to do a freeze of the ring buffer. So the entire network freezes, or at least wherever it's the area of interest basically freezes their ring buffer, and collection has to happen individually in each switch. And basically all the P records are evicted from the ring buffer and are sent to a central controller for debugging. So this collection is done via the control plane channel, and the data plane traffic is not at all affected. And now, since the timestamp is actually attached in each and every P record, this collection can be performed out of order. So you can have your own techniques to perform the collection, either through polling from the control plane or evicting through the data plane by creating new packets. But it can be completely out of order because timestamp is already attached to each and every P record.
One more question.
Yeah.
So when you one of the switches detect this this anomalous behavior, the others will take some time for this propagation to take place, right? That so there will be delay already.
Exactly.
Right? Because, so wouldn't that effect add some error to your observation?
Yes.
It's not instantaneous, right?
So it's not actually an error. So we call it correlation over. I mean, like we call it the amount of correlation that we can have between ends of the network. So you're exactly right. So we measure the amount of correlation that we can perform towards the evaluation. So it takes about for each hop, it takes about 1 to 2 microsecond to actually transmit the error packet. So that actually induces some amount of correlation overhead.
So maybe I didn't. Maybe you're answering it. I'm not completely clear. So what is happening that of all the switches of the area of interest have to freeze their state, right, and then transmit. But when they get this message, freeze your state, it is already a little bit delayed, right? Before I get information. Okay, that's what you're mentioning, right?
Yes, So it is delayed, but still it wouldn't impact your entire history.
Okay, so you're saying that there'll be some correlation, but it's not instantaneous. So that is clear. Okay,
yes. So we actually give the amount of history that you can correlate towards the end of the towards the evaluation. Okay. So I'll provide you the exact data.
Thanks, Praveen. Okay.
Hi, a quick question just to follow up to what Parimal was asking. On the S7 switch, I mean, even with the standard measurements that you have right now, you will have buffer overflow measurements that'll indicate there is, it may not say what is the cause, but at least it'll tell you what is happening. So what are we doing something different? You understand what I'm saying, right?
Okay, so you mean in terms of what is new in terms of fault detection, right?
Correct. So because right now the telemetry measurements that are available, that tells you what is the in packets, what is the out packets, what is the what is the congestion level and everything. And so it will say in which switch is sort of experiencing high congestion or which links are experiencing high congestion. It may not say what it is the cause for right now, which is done offline or something. So what are we doing something new what is done already?
So even if the existing techniques provide you the data on amount of congestion, you may still not have you may not be able to find the reason of which packets are affected. So you can actually answer many different things with this kind of a telemetry system, that is like associate packets to a particular fault. Like you can say that these packets actually caused a fault, and these are the packets that have been affected by these faults. And also you can actually deep dive into the application level problems, like this application is actually impacted by this fault. So so the current techniques more or less give you an overview of these links are affected, but it's still not enough to actually root cause or pin a fault on a reason on a particular set of packets or a set of or an application.
That's right. So sorry to maybe so you're saying that can cause, because if there is I'm just saying because I have done some of the testing myself. Okay. So there is some CRC errors in some packets and all that can cause some challenges with respect to the packet, because it might take a longer time and there can be some black holing, that sort of thing.
Yes, yeah.
So unless I have the full packet, I may not. Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. So here we are just looking at the header. Yeah.
So another question. So when you say that switches are freeze their state, so that time the ongoing packets are they affected by the freezing, or
no.
Like it's two different parallelly they are going?
Yeah, it's parallel. So we freeze only the ring buffer that we are writing to. So this collection is the period code recording is happening in a ring buffer. So the subsequent packets we not recording it in the ring buffer.
But suppose the subsequent packets that can also cause some problems.
Yes.
So then how do you
so actually in those cases, right? So when there are multiple faults happening, so we have a way to we have proposed a future buffer kind of thing. And also if you have a future buffer, right, like which is serving for only a few microseconds, that is enough to actually evict the history buffer and do this recording continuously and send to the collector. So basically, if you have a sufficient amount of buffer that is enough to that can cover the amount of time it takes to evict the history buffer, you can actually do the entire recording of the future also. I mean, future as in when a network fault is occurring, and even during that time, you can also do the recording and send to collector.
Okay, thank you.
So you can refer to the paper for like the on more discussion on that.
Sure,
so yeah, I have a doubt. So when you are I understand that the ring buffer is actually copying is similar to port mirroring, like copying the same packet twice, right?
Not the packet,
yeah.
but it's
so
won't
that actually affect header? Yeah. So but it requires a level of processing, right? So won't that affect the performance of the switch? Or so, that's given complete on a different processor?
No, it's actually it's done in the network pipeline. So we actually give the amount of resources that we use. So here we use extra to do this. The main extra resource that you're using is the SRAM, that is the memory to store these P records. So we like overall we measure. So actually we are just not dumping the packet headers just like that. So we actually do some amount of compression. That is packets coming together or within a few nanoseconds, we actually try to combine them. So such kind of techniques we apply, and we observe that to overall for like more than like 10 millisecond, we actually need about 5 MB of SRAM. So yeah,
that's fine. Yeah, I mean like that. Yeah, I got it. That's like very negligible. That's fine. Okay.
Yeah. So the current switches actually have like are at least promising to have hundreds of MBs. I mean, hundreds of or at least 50 or 60 MBs, something. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So the P records which are now received by the collector. So the collector can basically do the ordering of events and processing, and they are finally stored in a relational database, which allows us to perform SQL kind of network-wide queries. So let's say the operator wants to look at just the switch S7 in this case, right? So the switch S7 just received equal amount of packets from a different host, so you won't actually be able to observe an anomaly in this case, or at least the local information is not enough to debug this root cause of the microburst. However, since we can with SynDB, we can actually do network-wide querying on time-sensitive behavior to actually determine if this issue is caused due to a microburst. A query on the queuing delay of switch S7 together with the packet arrival information at the TOR switches can be performed. So basically, top plot shows the queuing pattern at the S7, and the bottom shows the packets arriving. That is each plus is an individual packet that is arriving at the TOR switches. So when we correlate the packet arrivals from different hosts before the switch occurred, we can see that the packets that make up this burst, basically our threshold is 10 microseconds, make up this burst are like, you can see the amount of synchronization that is happening to cause this burst. So in this way, actually the root cause of this particular incast can be determined as the asynchronized fan-in traffic, and appropriate measures such as pacing or moving the workloads separately, and those can be taken by the network operator. So during a regular network operation, like a network programmer basically can configure these statistics, need to configure the statistics that are to be recorded, the size of the recording buffer, and the triggers also, right? So for that, we actually provide a SynDB runtime. So this kind of a programmable API which can be programmed by the network operator, and the runtime basically compiles this and into a P4 program, and initially used to program a network data plane. And at runtime, it can actually change this configuration without having to reprogram the network data plane, and it can apply these changes as a control plane configuration. So basically the operator can program the amount of time to be captured, the fields that need to be captured, and also the triggers that for which you have to capture the P records. So yeah, sorry. So this is what a SetDB runtime basically would do. And it is an evolving process. That is, you perform the query and then you update. You have a new set of configuration to be done, and then you do that, and then it's a cycle in itself to like monitor the entire network and find faults. So let me go into the implementation and evaluation of SynDB. So we have implemented SynDB on a mini testbed that are consisting of Tofino switches using P4 and the runtime using Rust. So using the mini testbed, we have actually evaluated the consistency of capture of P records, and we have also have a set of use cases like debugging microburst, network misconfigurations, and so on. I think the other kind of use cases, you can have a look at the paper, and this particular talk I will focus on the simulation. That is, we also implemented a simulator to actually understand more about the retrospection and correlation capabilities of SynDB on a bigger network. So, so we basically want to study how much of information can we correlate that SynDB can help and correlate in a real world kind of setting. So for this, we have a FAT24 topology that we have implemented using simulator, and also used realistic traffic models based on a real world data center. So
can I stop you for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
So when you say this traffic model scaled based on real world DC, are you using traces or are you using models?
So actually we are using traces, and we actually modify the trace according to the scale. So because the trace was done on, for example, 10 GB links, we try to extrapolate it to 100 GB links.
So what do you just multiply the I mean, or you reduce the
the inter-packet gap? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so this is, but the web traffic, right? What about the MapReduce traffic?
For MapReduce, I mean, we have done on multiple traffic, but here I think we are just
showing for web apps.
Web traffic, yeah. Okay. But the overall traffic characteristic is there is more intra-rack traffic. That is 75% intra-rack traffic, and 25% is inter-rack.
So, but the 75% intra-rack traffic, I thought that is more MapReduce type of traffic. No, web apps is usually the smaller part of it. So, wouldn't that be more interesting traffic to look at?
So, so in this case, why we consider the 75% traffic is that's where we observe most correlation degrade for us. So because you are by the time let's say the fault is happening at a Tor switch, by the time you want to like trace the whole packet, whole sequence, the history gets rewritten faster within the rack itself, right? Because there is more traffic within the rack.
But so, wait a second, but but this is, you're showing web apps and you're saying there's a lot of intra-rack traffic due for web apps. That I'm not sure. I thought it was more because of the computation kind of, like a MapReduce kind of traffic, which is more intra-rack. No, I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
Okay. No, I mean, you may not be wrong. So actually, it could, I mean, here I'm saying web apps, but I'm not sure whether it's the 2575 is applicable for this web apps. I mean, this particular plot. So this particular plot is for the web apps case.
Okay.
So we have like multiple different kind of application behavior, but like we don't, the problem with the, I mean, at least the traffic that we used is we don't have much to choose from. So we have to like tune in the parameters, like how much of intra.
No, that is clear. Actually, this is the same problem we have. We also don't have much traffic traces available. That's why I wanted to ask. Anyways, go ahead. I'll ask more later.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So
I have a doubt. So, so you mentioned that this is a simulation, and you have used a traffic model from the traces. So, did you get the data from like packet by packet data from the traces, and then write your own library that would emulate this, or did you use some some generator, traffic generator like ICR load, IX load, or
no. So this was a simulation. So we don't generate a traffic. So we mainly worked on their inter-packet gap, inter-arrival kind of data that this paper had in their dumps, and we generated the packets ourselves. So we don't have the packet trace
so
at all.
You just use the model from the So you just use the model.
Just use the CDF or the just use based on that, generated based on that.
Yeah, got it. No, we know how difficult it is.
Yeah.
One second, Praveen. So that is for the inter-packet gap. What about the bandwidth? Are you assuming constant bandwidth, or you're changing over time?
So we are doing some changes. So actually we are introducing constant. We had like multiple different kinds of events. One is constant traffic, and with a burst of packets. So we have a constant traffic that is always running, and also introduce some burst of packets that are introduced now and then to the traffic.
But was this done in the paper which you referred, or this is just your idea to include
so this was not done in the paper. So for introducing the burst, we actually do it based on the Facebook paper, like based on how much amount of we try to match our link utilization to the link utilization of the Facebook data center. So so we try to have like a burst to basically make the link utilization similar to that.
Sorry, I'll ask more questions. Please go ahead. We're almost out of time. Thank you.
Okay. So so based on our results, we observed that SynDB can capture like 4 millisecond to 11 millisecond of history from across the end of the network for a network fault. I mean, it basically depends on where the network fault is happening. If it's happening in the TOR, you can capture only less. If it's happening in the aggregation or core, you can capture more because you have less a number of hops to cover the source of a packet. So so this basically 4 milliseconds to 11 milliseconds briefly translates to about hundreds of RTT of history for a packet level debugging of a fault. So, and to get this amount of history, we actually observe that we consume about 5 to 7 MB of SRAM on an average per switch. And with recently switches supporting a bigger SRAM, it's actually possible to do this in the existing switches. So let us okay, I'll maybe skip this for the time. So let's see what are the use cases of SynDB. So
that's useful. What is the overhead? Because
okay. Okay. If you're interested, definitely I'll cover that. Yeah. So the overhead that we observe. So mainly the overhead. The previous one that I covered is for collection of the P records. The other overhead that we is observed is when you are collecting these P. Sorry, that was for recording, and this is for collecting. And so for collection, we actually have a pipeline overhead of 100 million packets per second because we want to do this collection fast. So so what the technique that we are using is to generate packets using the packet gen available in the switches in the data plane, and to basically recirculate it and collect all the information that is there in the ring buffer. So this occupies about 10% of pipeline, but you can basically tune this according to your requirement, that is how much of history that you want. And currently we support about 6,000 triggers per second for 1 millisecond or 1 million P records. Yeah.
So what is considered to be a one trigger? Like any event that may represent the fault?
Yeah, so it could be like a packet drop could be a trigger. Like a spike in a network utilization could be a trigger. So it is entirely up to the. So the
network engineer can choose it.
Yes, yeah. So they can program it accordingly. So we don't actually. I mean, that's not. We are just designing the framework to do that. So we don't actually decide what to. Yeah. So, I mean, the use cases of SynDB, I mean, as you can see, I mean, it can help in debugging various different types of network issues, and also like application issues. If you can actually, there are many application issues like in timing bugs in application, where losing just a single packet can actually cause a problem. So those kind of issues can be, I mean, it's possible to use the insights that are available in SynDB. And I mean, in future, you can also use it to study the network traffic patterns and observe the amount of fairness that you are seeing in the network traffic. And I mean, another long shot is having a record and replay. Like you can record the ongoing thing that is happening in a production network and use it to kind of develop regression test suits that can be run in a staging environment. So so these are the use cases of SynDB. So so to summarize, basically, SynDB is the first network-wide synchronized debugging framework, and can be used to do network-wide debugging, and to support it can support several hundreds of RDT of history to do the debugging. And I mean, it can do these debugging with a significantly lesser storage and network overhead, because it basically stores the information in the switch and only exports it when a fault occurs. So I mean, I still have like about 5 minutes of things to cover, the topics that we work on at IBM. So let me just briefly stop here if there are further questions in SynDB itself.
Okay, please go ahead.
So I had one question about the timeliness of this. So you mentioned about 7 to 11 milliseconds of history can be captured, right? Mm-hmm. So the question is, if the capture is triggered by from the controller, can the controller either this pipeline of your program and then the compiling to P4 and then the P4 commands being pushed to the switches? Mm-hmm. Can it be done within that that timeline?
So this is already done, right? So the 4 to 11 millisecond is assuming that you have already done this configuration of network fault. So that timeline is definitely going to be much higher in terms of programming the switch, configuring it. So the amount of history that we are interested is only on an operational network, right? So you don't actually factor the time to configure it. And okay, let's say you want to change the configuration, you are affecting it for the next cycle of events that are happening, right? So it's not like an instantaneous thing that you observe this fault, you want to change something, and the next subsequent faults will observe that. That's what I wanted to show in that, the circle, the loop kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, so the triggers are already predefined and pre-programmed in the P4 code that is injected into the switches.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So at least at the Bootstrap, there should be some amount of triggers that are pre-programmed. Either it could be like at least the bare minimum could be at regular intervals capture this record, or more like a particular fault.
Thank you.
Okay. So if there are not any more questions in this, I can move to the. So is there time about 5 minutes? So
Praveen, please go ahead. We interrupted you many times, so I think. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let me just give a brief overview of our ongoing works at IBM Research India. So the works that we do are, I mean, I have categorized into two parts. Like one is telco cloud networking, and the second is multi-cloud. Let me tell you more about the telco space, what we are doing. So recently, telco service providers around the world are changing their network infrastructure and moving towards, I mean, moving away from a vertically optimized proprietary hardware to virtualized functions that are going to be deployed on a commodity off-the-shelf hardware. So the telco providers are going this direction with the vision of operating their networks in a unified, in a more unified manner towards the cloud, and are expecting more agility and manageability with significantly lower operational cost. So by moving the telco or network functions to the cloud, like we are faced with two key open problems. One is one is towards telco focused operations and closed loop orchestration. That is, this basically consists of building a monitoring and logging pipeline for the network function, which can actually be used to perform fault detection using different kinds of models. And finally, we would like to have like policy-based action recommendations to perform remediation. So to do this, we are actually doing a lot of metric collection and identifying what problems could occur and how to actually detect those faults in the network function itself. And a complementary second problem that we want to solve is more towards performance optimization. That is, first we want to identify the set of metrics that is needed to benchmark these NF. The NF that we are looking at is typically 5G network functions, like at the distributed unit, the centralized unit, the baseband processing, and so on. So here we are looking at what are the resources being used by the DUs, by the NF, and trying to optimize them by doing some kernel optimizations and also towards doing network offload, as in move them to the SmartNIC and performing more intelligent scheduling of the network functions to actually reduce the latency of the traffic. So that's pretty much what we do in telco. And the second part that I mentioned is multi-cloud networking. It's kind of an upcoming area that is being seen by many players in this area. So like we have seen that according to the survey, basically many companies now want to host their services across multiple cloud providers, like coupled with their own private cloud also. And why they want this is for resilience, different features provided by different cloud providers. And there are several bunch of reasons why they want to operate with multiple different cloud providers and also different kinds of the cloud model itself. So this gives rise to a challenging problem of how to connect them, orchestrate them, and provide a unified kind of way to schedule workloads and placement of the workloads in a hybrid model. So this has more like even scheduling workloads and how to orchestrate the network also, right? So let me give you an example of this, like where a car company A has hosted its services on multiple cloud providers. So let's say an autonomous vehicle service is running on cloud Y, the connected car technology is running on the cloud Z, and upon that they have their own manufacturing services running on their private cloud. So now for a car company to orchestrate this their software across multiple different cloud providers and a private cloud is definitely going to be challenging, and you definitely need a multi-cloud software solution to actually make make sure that the connectivity issues and their seamless operation can be performed in terms of placement of the workloads, how do they communicate with each other, and so on. So towards this, we are actually working on a multi-cluster gateway, which can be deployed as deployed on commodity devices to be acted as a point of presence. And these gateways basically need to manage several functions, like they need to manage tunnel management and do encryption when needed, depending on the use case. And they need to perform policy enforcement, like which services talk to each other in terms of application level services. And they need to manage the underlays also to ensure that they can guarantee the SLAs and by using the multipath connections available. And they also need to monitor the monitor or perform telemetry to provide assurance, and also telemetry for fault diagnostics. So here you have to pin the accountability on a certain because you're operating with different entities. There is always a reason of accountability. So you have to be able to provide that accountability to know where a fault is occurring, and also like flow-based scheduling that can be performed, like coupling many different flows from a cluster, scheduling them in a different way. And finally, we are looking, this direction is more towards, we are looking towards accelerating using eBPF or XDP, like more internal technology to do this in the stack. And the main reason is we want to do this in any cloud, regardless of what technology they run. So you can so that XDP is actually easier to deploy in the sense, like you don't need an extra hardware or additional like a user space networking to do that. So it actually would be much easier to deploy in that aspect. So
yeah, I have a doubt regarding this. So you mentioned that you used some kind of an SLA to monitor the performance. So do you have a standard? Do you use a standard SLA, open source SLA, or like IBM has its own SLAs to match?
IBM has its own SLAs, but we don't actually. I mean, this is an upcoming thing, so we haven't dig down to what type of SLA.
Okay, fine.
So this is pretty much like just starting up. So we are just doing the measurements and so on. So it's still pretty much premature to go into the SLA part for me. Yeah. So okay, yeah. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. So thanks for listening. So let me know if you have any other further questions.
So I had a comment regarding like also since you mentioned containers and virtual networking in this. So pushing the going back to your SynDB application, pushing the packet capture to network endpoints. And now because you're doing it at the network host endpoints, you will have to do it at multiple hosts, not just a single switch. And you'll have to stitch together a picture of the anomaly and capture at the controller. But in fact, with XDP, this is a sweet spot for XDP application. So
that's right. Yeah.
Have you thought about that aspect?
Yeah. So actually, yeah, that's something that is coming across my mind as well. Like, so actually, it's both are complementary to each other, like the XDP and having the network kind of debugging. So definitely, that is one space that that I'm interested in working on in future, like having them stitched together, having a more unified way of having all the metrics and telemetry, so that you can have a fault debugging in the application level as well as the networking level as well. Yeah.
Thanks. Are there any further questions?
So Praveen, so it seems like you can do this fault detection sort of post facto, right? I mean, like the squaring and all, right? I mean, this sort of, you have to know what you're looking for. I mean,
yeah.
What you didn't tell us, or maybe this is by design, is how do you do this online, like that in real time, right? And maybe that, because what I'm thinking of the follow-up question is that if I want to do something with it, right, I would like to detect it as quickly as I can, but I guess that's not the objective, or?
So the objective is not to detect as quickly as you can, but to detect not to detect it as quickly, but to detect it definitely, like have the at least.
But if you wanted to take action, you would also want to detect it quickly, right? I mean, some faults probably you cannot do much about, right? But some faults you can probably do something about, right? And you would want to be able to detect those faults quickly and act in time before, like it's too late. I mean, the fault disappear and it's already done the damage.
Yeah. So it becomes so that doing kind of a like a remediation kind of a model in the data plane itself becomes very challenging, because you like especially in the case of like distributed fault, like you don't know where the fault is coming from. So you may not know whether what action that you took is going to fix the fault. That is one aspect, and so that's pretty challenging thing in itself, like to detect and remediate the fault immediately as soon as possible. Okay. Especially like when we are seeing things happening in microsecond and milliseconds.
So are there also faults which sort of persist for a long time? I mean, since you have done these experiments and
yeah. There are faults which persist, definitely, like the network misconfiguration, right? It could cause a black hole, which could last for more than many seconds, or even be an unless you remediate it, it won't actually be solved. So there are issues like that, and to debug, I mean, to at least remediate those, it's still, I mean, at least in the at least operational, it takes at least a few minutes to hours to actually to debug and solve the issue.
So how is it done typically right now? I mean, like, so I would assume that there is some kind of like alert system.
Yeah.
And so is it still manual, or is it an engineer goes in and then tries to debug what is going on?
So so typically you would have like you can have alert system at the I'm not sure about the network level. You have this NetFlow and SFlow, which kind of gives you a dashboard if you build on it. And but yeah, I mean, the dashboard keeps updating every like second or every few seconds. So that is one way to just so you can actually program queries on top of it, and that can alert you. So that at the network level, that is the existing way to do it. Like you have these metrics that are being polled like every second or every few minutes, and that basically.
But you said there is a remedial measure has to be taken for in a fault like black hole, right? So yeah, that means if misconfiguration has happened, somebody has to detect.
Somebody has to,
right? And that means an engineer has to be brought in and has to start looking at it. Okay.
Yes, yeah. That is the scenario now.
Okay, that's what I was asking. Thank you.
Yeah.